This video is intended only for mature audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. Warning: this story contains loss of a child. A faceless man appears in my room every night at 3 a.m. I have no idea how long he's been appearing in my room. My first, earliest memory of him was when I was about 8, and I woke up to see him standing in the corner of my room. I began screaming my head off, and my parents and siblings came running in and switched on the light. I pointed in his direction, but they all looked so confused and claimed there was nothing there. He suddenly just vanished out of sight, and I was left shaking and crying. My parents assumed it was just a nightmare and let me sleep with them that night. He has been appearing in my room every night since then. Most nights I sleep through the night, but I always have really bad nightmares for a few minutes each night. I woke up one night and saw him once again, standing there. I turned on the light to get a better look at him. He was wearing a black 3-piece suit that looked like it had seen better days. A few of the buttons were missing, and it hung awkwardly on him as if he was wearing someone else's suit. His face was completely blank, with no way to determine what he had once looked like. His hair was black that was starting to get speckled with a few grays. I know it seems crazy, but it felt like he was studying me while I was doing the same. He once again just disappeared. There was no flash of light or anything like that, as he just wasn't there 1 second. I went back to sleep and wondered what he was and if I was afraid. The next day, I was telling my 2 best friends, Chloe and Hannah, about him. The 3 of us were inseparable, and we were regarded as the 3 Musketeers. All of our classmates used to joke that we were joined at the hip. Our parents ended up becoming good friends as we spent so much time at each other's houses. Neither of them believed me about him and demanded to stay the night. I was hesitant at first, but reluctantly agreed to keep them happy. We were all so excited and could barely sleep that night. My alarm went off at 3 a.m. and we sat there with giddy expressions on our faces. I watched as the faceless man once again materialized in the corner of the room. His appearance looked different tonight, as there was a red glowing hole in his face, and it always used to be expressionless. I was staring intently at it when I felt Hannah's arm try to grab onto me. She had a look of pure horror on her face, as something was dragging her off the bed. Chloe was already on the floor, and I could see her nails digging into the floorboards as she desperately tried to stop herself. The glowing hole on the faceless man's face increased in size and now was the size of a football. Both Hannah and Chloe were now on the floor and being forced towards the faceless man. He lowered his head to the ground, and I watched the expressions of fear and pleading as my 2 best friends were swallowed up by the faceless man. He rose to his feet and then vanished out of sight. I sat there silently for a few seconds, processing what had happened, and then began screaming my head off. My parents came running into my room, and I explained to them what had just happened. They looked at me like I had 2 heads and told me that I never had any friends called Hannah and Chloe. The next morning, I went over to their houses and talked to both of their parents. They claimed that they never had children by that name. I pointed out pictures of them on the wall, and they couldn't explain why they had them up. Chloe's mother started weeping, and she begged me to leave as I was upsetting her. I returned to school the next week, and it was horrible. Everyone was making fun of me and calling me a loser for never having any friends. No one could remember my 2 best friends, even though they had known them for years. We moved out of that house the next year, and the faceless man came with us. I swore to myself that I would not let anyone else be harmed by him. I instituted rules with any of my future boyfriends that they were not allowed to spend the night with me. It ended up in a few breakups, but I wanted to keep them safe. The faceless man would still appear every night at the exact same time. My husband is okay with these rules. We live in a 2-bedroom house, and he spends each night in the spare room. He knows I love him, so he does it to keep me happy. I was awoken to agonizing pain throughout my body, and I looked up to see the faceless man standing there with the glowing hole once again on his face. I looked around in confusion as my husband was away for the weekend. I let out a scream of pain as my insides felt like they were being torn apart. I looked down between my legs and saw a tiny little hand coming out of me. The pain was unbearable, and I was desperately trying not to pass out as I watched my twin sons being born. I only got to see them for a few moments as they were ripped out of me and consumed by the faceless man. I lay there covered in blood and felt the tears of anguish running down my face. I had only been 7 months pregnant and had never thought he would take them if they were still inside of me. My husband and I broke up not long afterwards, as he couldn't understand why I suddenly decided to want to become child-free. It was the hardest decision of my life, but I knew it was the right thing to do. I now live alone and wait up every night to see the faceless man and wonder if someday he will decide to take me. Please help me. My hands are shaking as I'm typing this up. I can barely look at the text for more than 2 seconds. I can see it looking at me. It doesn't even try to hide it. If I could, I'd never see it again, but I don't know how to do that. I've never heard or experienced anything like this or similar to this. It doesn't make any sense, but that's why I'm typing my experience here. Maybe one of you knows what this is. About an hour ago, school finished. It had been a tough day with a difficult test in math. My head was stir-fired up as I walked home. Usually I'd be sucked in on my phone, but it had broken and I didn't have enough for a new one. I looked around the path home, eager to find something to fill my mind, when I saw an odd shape in the wall that I couldn't help but look closer at. In the brick wall, half a face stuck out. It was as if somebody had decapitated a person, cut their face in half, slicing down in such a way as to keep the face whole, and slapped it stuck on the wall. But even from this range, it felt that something was off about the face. I brought my hands up to my eyes and rubbed them until they became all teary, but the face didn't disappear. If anything, it became clearer, and I wondered if it was an illusion. I'd heard of them, but I'd never experienced anything like it. It interested me, and I approached closer to get a better view of it. I cringed and cursed my mind for its horrible creation. A yellow, rotten fungus, the type that grew like rough stone, was the skin of the face. Black pimples covered the skin like ripe grapes, full and ready to explode at just a simple touch. The eyes were dead and stared off somewhere distant, the type of eyes a widow reminiscing over her dead husband might have. Its lips were completely black, large, and voluptuous. A black liquid smeared them bloody, and a bit of it ran down the chin. Its tongue hung out. Large red warts covered it like bats huddling close on a wall. The tongue reached down all the way to the chin, and then some. I had to know if it was real, or rather, I had to disprove this horror. My hands slowly reached for its chin. I expected them to go right through, and a part of me felt like the creature did the same thing. It didn't. My heart jolted. I felt it and it felt me, and its pupils jerked into eye contact. I took 3 steps back, wondering what the hell had happened. Fear took my face. What are you doing? I said out of instinct, but the only response I received was a smile. The fungus creating its cheeks cracked and snapped as its lips slowly grew wider. The tongue swirled round and round its lips. I ran the rest of the way back home, feeling its glare behind me. When I reached the door, I was heaving and leaning down, resting my palms on my knees. The image of that disgusting and vomit-inducing face wouldn't leave my mind. I'd pondered if it was a nightmare, but what nightmare was so detailed? This had to be life. I just hoped I wouldn't have to see the face again. Already, I'd begun to think of different paths home to avoid that part of the wall. I didn't care if I had to walk 10, 20, 30 minutes longer. I wouldn't risk seeing that face again. Then, in my room, I saw the face. It stuck out of the part of the wall just above my monitor. Its pupils pushed to the side, trying desperately to look at me. There was no neck sticking out. Its face was stuck in that position, pointing right at the other wall. "What the fuck do you want?" I screamed, but there was no response. Immediately, I walked out of my room, but then I saw the face on the wall of the corridor outside of my room. I jumped back, and I saw it back in my room. Shame took over me. I couldn't let a face glued to the wall scare me out of my room. I'd like to say fear vanished then, but that's not the entire truth. Slowly, I took steps going deeper into my room, staring at the face and completely ready to sprint out at any moment. When I reached my closet, I stared at the face and it stared at me. For a few minutes, I just stood there waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. I realized that even if the face existed, the worst it could do was look at me, and I could bear with that. It wasn't actually a threat to me. And to prove that, I decided to change my clothes right there in front of it, and I pulled my shirt over my head, and the second I was done with that, I stared at the face. I felt like the face had grown larger, but I accounted that to my paranoia. I looked down and pushed my pants down, and once again, I felt like the face had grown larger. I put on a shirt and pants, and the face felt larger. At this point, I could see the cracks in the fungus on its cheeks. I knew it wasn't just my imagination. I walked to the side, and what I saw made me scream at the top of my lungs. Just behind the face, there was a neck that was completely black, that was almost 1 meter long, and pushed the face towards me. I heard stomping in the house, somebody rushing towards my room. The face quickly receded back into the wall, disappearing completely. My father entered the room, face full with panic.
"What the hell are you screaming at?"
he said, and I pointed at the wall. There's a face in the wall.
"What?"
I swear to God, there's a monster or something that's a face in the wall.
"Oh my fucking God. Stop with your childish nonsense. I know that you don't want this room, but if you make up any more lies, I'll throw you out of the house. And open the fucking window, it smells like death in here."
He stomped out of my room, slamming the door shut, and the face slowly creeped out from behind the wall, like a face emerging from water with a large grin on its face. I was alone to deal with this. Slowly, I fuddled towards my window and opened it. I noticed then that the smell was terrible, almost making me retch. The fungus on that face had to be ancient. "Get out!" I said to the face with all the courage I could muster up. "Get the fuck out of my room!" Nothing. But then I heard the irritating noise of a mosquito flying into my room. I don't know why, but rage flooded into me, and my hands flew forward and slammed together. I saw the mosquito's body and blood on my palms. I realized then that if I wanted to remove this pest from my room, I had to kill it. But I didn't want to touch it, so I rushed out of the room and to the kitchen. I grabbed the largest knife I could find whilst making sure my father didn't see anything, and walked back to the room full with thoughts of murder. The rage drowned out my fear. It drowned up every reasonable thought too, and as I walked down the corridor, I only grew more and more furious. I entered my room, getting closer to the face. I opened my mouth wide, roared as loud as I could, and swung the knife down on the face. And at the last second, the face thrusted towards me. Its rotten lips pressed against mine. They massaged against mine, the black liquid acting as a lube. They were ice cold and my lips turned ice numb. I struggled to close my mouth, but I couldn't, and instead I felt the different crumbles of fungus getting into my mouth. The face shoved its heavy tongue into my mouth. The different warts brushed up against the top of my mouth and against my tongue. I felt the saliva in my mouth getting in between the warts. The taste of flesh filled my mouth. The tongue went further into my throat, spreading it wider. My eyes were wide open, and its eyes were staring right into me, seemingly enjoying the look of horror I gave it. Over and over, my knife shoved into its neck. I felt something grab my hand, and in the corner of my sight, I saw an arm and hands. I realized what I should have realized earlier. Of course the face had a body. I bit down on its tongue and had a rotten liquid splashed around my mouth. I gagged, and the tongue slipped deeper into my throat. I could feel it stretch the skin. For a minute, its tongue pulsed up and down my throat. Suddenly, the tongue pulled back from my throat covered in slime, and the creature disappeared into the wall. My father walked into the room, and I fell down on the floor, vomiting all over. Now, I don't know what to do. I feel weak. I feel powerless. I feel used. Just being inside of the face's sight makes me repulsed. I need help. Does anybody here work with killing these things? Please, I'll pay all I have. Just get this face out of my room. I can't imagine what it'll do when I fall asleep.